Welcome to another episode of FPTV. I'm managing editor of foreign policy, Blake Hounshell, and this is our annual gala for the Global Thinkers of 2011. I'm here with Jared Cohen, who is the founder and head of Google Ideas, which is a new think/do tank. Jared is late of the State Department, where he was once, I believe, the youngest member of the policy planning staff. So we're happy to have you here. Let me just ask you, tell us a little bit about Google Ideas. You've focused on violent extremism, I know, in the past year, but what are some of the other ideas you've been working on?
Well, stepping back, the reason we created Google Ideas is because if we look at the world today, we're seeing the growing ubiquity of technology that in the next 10 years is no longer going to be questioned. And the questions we're going to be asking in the next few years are, what is the impact on that these tools of empowerment have on some of the toughest challenges of our time? So what Google Ideas does is it focuses on a set of challenges that are so complex and so intractable, they don't fall in an obvious philanthropic box for a technology company. They don't fall in an obvious core business box for a technology company. They're sort of stuck in the middle. The nexus with technology is not that obvious right now. So my mandate is to think 5 to 7 years out at which challenges will intersect with technology in a way that could be problematic or in a way that could be highly constructive. So radicalization, weak and failed states, issues related to governance, issues related to illicit networks. And I have the mandate to look out and try to push the company and push our technology expertise into an arena where there's a lot of people working on these challenges and understanding them inside out, but who don't necessarily understand how the tools work and how the tools can help.
Now, there's been a lot of chatter over the last year or so, really ever since the Green Revolution in Iran, about the role of technologies like Facebook and Twitter in democratic revolutions or uprisings. How important do you think those tools really are?
I mean, I think they're enormously important. They don't make or break revolutions. They're a critical tool and now a critical attribute of these revolutions. I lived in Iran for part of 2004 and part of 2005 when I was in grad school. And I remember going into some of these marketplaces and watching young people use tools that I used every single day in ways that I didn't even know were possible. For instance, I'd always thought of Bluetooth as a way to talk and drive at the same time.
It's a dating tool, man.
Not as a tool to call and text complete strangers to tell them where to go that night. And it seemed frivolous at the time, and when you talk to people about it, it seemed frivolous. But then when the government shut down SMS and shut down the internet, Bluetooth, because it's peer-to-peer, was one of the few ways that people were actually able to share content, as long as they were within close proximity to one another. Now, the reason that's interesting is these tools have essentially lowered the barriers of entry to being an activist. Now, there's a good part of that and a bad part of that. The good side of it is any individual who has access to a mobile device or access to the internet can make their voice heard, can lend their voice to an issue, can be part of organizing. They can do it part-time. They can do it full-time. The bad news is in the future, revolutions may be easier to start. They may happen faster, but I actually think they'll be even harder to finish. Technology is very good at creating noise and activity. But technology doesn't create new leaders. And for a revolution to be successful, it has to actually create a new leader that can actually run for president, win, and then upon winning, actually deliver for the population and build functioning, well-governed institutions. And a lot of these revolutions happen so quickly and are organized and led by people that are really good at using these tools. But that doesn't mean those same individuals are the right ones to actually lead the country forward. Now, I do think a lot of this will change because we have this kind of gap generation right now where the people often in charge have to play catch-up if they want to understand these tools. And it's going to take an entire generation that's the first socialized with high prevalence of mobile devices and access to the internet to come of an age where they can actually be in charge for that expertise and that innate knowledge of technology to actually be ingrained in the leadership. Where I think this is going to be interesting, if you look at revolutions, say 5 to 7 years out, I think regimes are going to be faced with a very interesting challenge, which is if they're used to having a certain number of people in the population that they either watch over or govern, they're now going to have to deal with not only the number of physical people in their population, but all the virtual entourages that come with them. And those virtual entourages can be an individual and their multiple online profiles, or it can be that individual plus a bunch of transnational meddlers. be it a kid in their garage in San Francisco, a member of the diaspora, or anyone in the world who really sympathizes with their cause. There's now sort of a global youth diaspora where technology is the common language and the common platform, and when a young person in one country sees what's happening to a young person in another country, in particular around censorship, it kind of appeals to the same youthful instincts. And where regimes will trip up is they're going to have to actually make a calculation between what's actually noise and not in fact a real revolution, and make sure they don't overreact to it, or they're going to have to determine whether or not something is in fact real that they do have to react to. And oftentimes I think regimes are going to get that wrong. And I think in Egypt they got that wrong. I think in Tunisia they got that wrong. And I think in a number of other Arab Spring countries they got that wrong.
I've heard stories from Syrian activists that when they've been caught at checkpoints or crossing the border guards ask them, let's see your phone. Okay, so they hand them their phone, and the guards say, do you have Facebook? You hear a lot of anecdotes like that, but what I worry about is that these regimes are catching up to the technology, and that the stupidity and the lack of understanding of how these tools can be used is a temporary advantage for dissidents.
I think that's partly right. I think it's more a cat and mouse game. The population will innovate, the regime will get caught off guard, the regime will innovate in response. People will find themselves getting in trouble for what they thought was previously safe. As a result, they'll innovate around it. What's changed, though, is that cat and mouse game used to take place just within the borders of a country. Now revolutions don't happen in private anymore. And because revolutions don't happen in private anymore, the failures of one population in terms of losing that cat and mouse game become known to populations, not just neighboring them, but anywhere in the world. And what we found in the Arab Spring is there was a lot of sharing going on across borders. I remember when I was in Egypt during the revolution, and I was watching all these kids run around with this rag and lemon and lime with the tear gas, and I said, how did you know how to do this? He said, oh, the Tunisians told us. And I thought that was kind of an interesting story. Now, it's just an anecdote, and it's an anecdote that doesn't have as much to do with technology other than the fact that they learned about it from the Tunisians through these tools. But there's going to be different sort of edges that a regime and a population has. Over time, I think that it's a net positive for the population for two reasons. One, they outnumber the regime. They have more allies outside of the borders than the regime. And then finally, they don't have to just innovate themselves because, again, revolutions don't happen in private. The innovative needs that they'll have in order to actually have that extra advantage in the cat and mouse game against a repressive regime can take place even from a sympathizer in a completely different continent. And while individuals are physically constrained by borders, their ideas aren't constrained by borders, and their apps aren't always constrained by borders.
Now, my final question for you is, your book was very prescient about how the youth of the Arab world would respond to their changing environment. What surprised you most about this past year?
I think one thing that I hadn't thought about, I'd spent a lot of time traveling in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Palestinian camps, and I'd always thought about all of this in isolation. I'd thought about Syria as Syria, I'd thought about Lebanon as Lebanon, I thought about Iran as Iran. I had sort of failed at the time to appreciate what a contagion of discontent could actually look like. I hadn't sort of appreciated, this whole notion that a successful revolution in one country can help give rise to a contagion that spreads across multiple countries. This is why I make the argument that I don't think the Arab Spring actually started in December of 2010. I actually think it started in June of 2009 in the only non-Arab country in the region, Iran. I think the Iranians failed to achieve their local objective in terms of overturning presidential elections, but I think they succeeded in putting an idea out there that a large number of people armed with nothing more than a cell phone can stage a revolution in a way that, even if they're not successful, holds a regime more accountable, is far more transparent. I think we really have to ask ourselves the question, what would happen if all this mobile footage and all this technology wasn't there today? I actually do believe a lot of these leaders tragically have the political will to kill far larger numbers of people. I don't think they have the political will to do it at the scale that they want to do it with the world watching. And I think that's actually a very significant development. Now, we're nowhere near where we want to be because a lot of people are tragically still being killed. But just the sort of notion that this can spread across lots of different countries is I think, the most surprising to me.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.